Have you ever surfed the net for a few minutes and a few hours later come off empty-handed?
So how do you find good original content if you're surrounded by, well, you know?
That's where The Bridge comes in.
When The Bridge finds good original content, they share it.
A couple of weeks ago, my show, The Honky Tonk Cabin, found a new home on The Bridge country. The Honky Tonk is a show which features the best of UK country music.
And my shows, Conversations with Louis Robinson and 10-Minute Takeaways, will be joining The Bridge too.
So if you have a podcast or video presentation that you'd like to share
it on The Bridge.
www.thebridgevisualradio, all one word, .com. And the email address is thebridgevisualradio@gmail.com. Now, on The Bridge Talk, it's Conversations with Louis Robinson.
Today, I'll be talking to Kyle Hanna. He's the co-founder of a publishing house, Jumpmaster Press. Kyle's also an author. His bestseller is a time travel trilogy, which puts him in a long tradition of a very old genre.
When was the last time you dreamed about what the future holds? Or changing a moment from the past? These are questions that human beings have thought about since the beginning of our existence.
Now, once the future was a realm reserved for prophets and poets and astrologers. And then in 1659, the French writer Jacques Gutin published a book which was subtitled The History of the Future Century. It was the first story, as far as I can tell, in which humans were displaced not by place or space, but by time. In 1733, an Irish writer, Samuel Madden, wrote a book. The form of it was a series of diplomatic letters called Memoirs of the 20th Century. But he didn't explain how his narrator traveled into the future. Usually, writers at the time depended on the good old device of dreams. Think of Washington Irving's Rip Van Winkle, Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol. In 1889, in Mark Twain's novel, The Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, Hank Morgan from Hartford, Connecticut, gets hit over the head with a crowbar and wakes up in the year 528. What about the method of time travel? In 1887, 8 years before H.G. Wells, a Spanish author called Enrique Gaspar wrote El Acronapiti, meaning something that flies backwards through time. Now, like Doctor Who's TARDIS, Gaspar's time machine is bigger on the inside than out, complete with a kitchen and an observation deck. By the way, the book fell into obscurity because of the time machine and was published in English as recently as 2012. It was called The Time Ship. But I mentioned the time machine, and for most people, that's what time travel means. In 1887, H.G. Wells put his journalism aside and concentrated on what he called his peculiar treasure, a book about a machine that could travel through time. A first draft called The Chronic Argonauts appeared in the Science Schools Journal in 1888, and 6 drafts later, now called The Time Traveler, he found a publisher. Under its final title, The Time Machine, it was published in 1895.
Time travel.
It's possible, sir.
Not in this world.
Where do you come from?
I'm from the past.
But over the years, plots involving time have been notoriously difficult to construct.
In a minute. You see a snail race by.
How do you interact with the past and not change the present?
And the hours speeding across the face of my sunlight.
But what does it cost a man to face the incredible dangers of the past?
How do you visit the future and not alter the past?
Come back with me.
Where?
Back to the future.
They opened a hole in time, and it stayed open.
Good God, there it is.
I'm coming with you.
You can't. Our next stop is the 23rd century. Full power now, sir.
It's a problem.
We are prisoners to time. Mankind has always been fascinated with the idea of escaping from it.
To be able to go back in time and fix a mistake or change the outcome of a future event.
Could it even be possible?
Kyle, if there are so many problems with time, and getting the logistics of it right. Why did you go for time? Why not just a period story?
Well, with Time Assassins, it wasn't really about the time travel. It's about the history. It's not your H.G. Wells kind of thing. What I wanted to do was write a historical fiction piece that found a unique way of teaching history. So what I did was I came up with the Assassin's Guild in the future has developed time travel, and then they go back and influence events.
But why do they have to influence the action? Why can't they just view it?
And in some cases they do. For instance, in the first book, Time Assassins, one of the subplots revolves around presidential history, US presidential history. And a lot of people don't know, and that's kind of why I wrote the book. Every president elected in a 0 year between 1840 and 1960 died in office. 8 presidents. 4 of the 8 were assassinated. And then Ronald Reagan, elected in 1980, survived his assassination attempt and broke the cycle. But in Lincoln's case, the way I wrote it was it is a fixed point in history. So they went back to catalog the event in case they wanted to change it later. So in this case, they did just observe. In other times, like for the JFK assassination, he needed, in their scenario, he needed to meet his demise for their betterment. So they worked it out. So you get a bit of both.
How do you go about researching this stuff? And when you research it, don't you see that the facts are set in stone and cannot be changed?
Yes and no. I spent 6 to 8 months of research for each book. So each book in the trilogy took me about 2 years between writing it, researching it, editing, et cetera, et cetera. So this trilogy is actually 6 years of my life. But when you start researching, and I will pick on the JFK assassination, November 22nd, 1963. There are so many conspiracy theories running around. The grassy knoll, a second shooter, the CIA, blah, blah, blah. And I literally spent weeks going through the Zapruder files to get all the facts straight. But there's so many contradictions and variables. Yes, we know what happened. You know, he died, but there are so many little things that someone like me as a fiction writer can pull apart to give you that shadow of doubt. And I tell you, everything that I wanted to put in for that couple of chapters, all the conspiracy theories fit. So I used like all of them, and with the Assassin's Guild and future, you know, someone traveling in time, it all fit, and it was one of my favorite chapters to write.
Why did you publish through your own publishing company? Why didn't you go to a publisher, or did you do it and not have any luck?
I have gone through. I look at the publishing industry. There's 3 ways of doing it. 4 actually. You can self-publish it yourself. You can pay someone to do it. I do not recommend that. Don't do that. You can find a small independent press to do it. Or you can find someplace like Jumpmaster Press. We're a more traditional publisher. Yes, we're small, but we're growing, and we're not a vanity press. And before I created Jumpmaster Press, I actually did all 3 of those. I self-published. I paid a company to do it. And then I found not 1, but 2 other publishers, small presses. So I've run the gambit on publishing my works. And through all of that, what I have determined was I could do it better.
What's the difference between vanity publishing and what you're doing?
When people talk about vanity press, in my instance, when I hear that, I think they'll publish anything. Send it in. They may gloss over it as an edit once or twice, or once or not at all. And then they'll put it out there, and then you can say, I'm a published author. Yeah, look at me. What we do, we have very strict editing guidelines. We edit not once, but twice with 2 different people are going to edit this book. So what one person gets, hopefully the second, will find. And then it goes to beta readers. We have a process to make it as good as it can get, both literarily and grammatically.
Well, how do you publicize your stuff? Because I see you at various cons. Is that your main way of because you're sci-fi basically, aren't you?
Well, we've branched out. We also do horror, children's books now. We have a memoir. We even had some romance for a little while. So we are a full-fledged publishing company. We specialize in sci-fi, fantasy, and horror. But yes, conventions are our main way of getting out to meeting the public. We have stepped up our social media campaign this year. We're doing author spotlights each month, and I try not to spam people with just a constant deluge of social media posts. We do a quarterly newsletter, and you can sign up for that at jumpmasterpress.com.
But when people come to you at cons, everybody at con is a writer. Everybody's a writer.
Oh, yes.
All got
yes.
books in our back pocket, and you're gonna be deluged with manuscripts.
Right, and we are.
And how many of those would you accept?
It just depends. Like right now, I am closed for submissions, but I'm still getting them. And but we also do something a little different. One of the things we do when we meet all of these authors at the conventions, because, and I don't mean to talk negatively about anyone, but because I did it too. We all come up and go, here's my book. You're welcome, world. And then other people start reading it, and you find out that maybe it's not the best thing since sliced bread. So what we do is once a month, we actually host via Zoom a writer's seminar. We have a writers group on Facebook, the Jumpmaster Press writers group, and it's free to join. And then once a month, we do a topic to help teach people and hone their skills, so that we can take our family of writers there in the group and get them to a point where we want to publish them. We've been doing this for a couple of years, and we've signed 4 or 5 of our students into our authors.
You see, that's important, because what people don't realize is that there are things behind the craft, little technical things. Like, for instance, you said at one point that you would really like the Assassins Trilogy to be a TV show.
Yes, very much.
Having been a television producer, I look at that and I don't think, is this a good idea or a bad idea? I think, jeepers creepers, this is going to be expensive.
Right.
So your biggest problem really isn't the story or the execution of the story, it's the logistics of the production.
Right. And to that end, we actually have another company called Countersink Media. We just formed it in December, and that is going to be our television and movie production company. And we've reached out to our authors, and we've got 2 or 3 viable candidates for, the first one's got to be low budget. I don't have $10 million.
But you've got, with sci-fi, you're talking about low budget.
Well, the first 1 or 2 will not be sci-fi. We have partnerships with other publishing companies, and we think we found the right script. It's a romance. So,
I was just going to say that to you, because the cheapest, most effective, highest audience productions at the moment come from the romance sector.
Right.
Hallmark and the Great American Country or whatever the new channel is, and ION and all and Lifetime, and they are done on a budget, a tiny budget, very, very quickly by directors who know how to go fast.
Well, going to all of these conventions, you know, we've met, my business partner and I, we have met a lot of celebrities, and we've talked to people, and I'm not going to drop any names, but we've talked to people that are interested in helping us grow. And, you know, we've had more than one stop up, just, hey, we want to do this. I'm in. Just flat out, I'm in.
Yeah.
So we're going to tap into their knowledge about video production and directing and all this. Do the fundraising bit. Make sure the scripts are good. And the goal for Countersink Media is to eventually take stuff like Time Assassins and some of our other works and make them into high quality, good, wholesome entertainment.
Good.
And that's our goal. Is we want something, when we write our books, when we publish the books, we do not allow gratuitous scenes. The language is PG-13, we'll say. And because we want this to be a family-oriented company. You pick up any of our books, you're going to hear worse language on primetime TV than you'll read in our novels.
That's exactly what I was going to go on in a future program to talk about, which is that these romance novels, films that I was talking about, done by these relatively small companies, although Hallmark isn't small, they create a world which is a different world to the one you see in mainstream movies from Hollywood. There are families, they have children. And I've always said that you can always tell when a child goes out to play in the garden. What happens to that child tells you a lot about the production company. And in the romance movies, they go out and they come back with a widowed father and another child, or a dog, you know. And actually, you know, that's more about real life than having your child snatched by some serial killer. So what you're doing really, I'm putting words in your mouth, but it's what I was thinking of doing in a future show, which is to talk about how you create a world which people accept, and you're changing the landscape of what you're watching. So when you do see one of these ridiculous movies in which there is always a glum cop, there is always a serial killer, there is always a gun that never empties, there is always a city that's falling apart, you look at that and you go, that's not real. And you go back to Hallmark and you think, actually, I live in a place more like that than I do in the previous one, right?
And that is exactly why we named it Countersink. We are countering the mainstream media with well-produced, well-written, well-acted, we hope, stories. And, you know, that's one thing that we strive for, even when we're talking to our students. What you just said, we strive for the realism. I stress, and I was just editing before this interview, and I wrote, you know, make sure you're putting in the emotions of how these characters feel. That's realism. That's how your reader is going to relate to the characters in the story.
That's what Jim Caviezel said to some religious producers, I remember. He said, you know, the trouble with religious movies, the sort of Christian movies, is that they're unrealistic. And when he was in one, all he kept saying was, keep it real, keep it real, keep it real, which is, I guess, why Mel Gibson's movie about Jesus was such a hit, was because there was real violence there in a really violent situation.
And it wasn't gratuitous. There was a purpose behind it. And that's what I tell my authors and my students is, if you're wanting to do this, there has to be a realistic catalyst for this to happen. It has to make sense. It has to have a modicum of realism, and your reader has to relate to it. And if you can get those elements in, that's a great start.
Well, look, I wish you luck with Jumpmaster Press. and we'll come back to you and talk to you again in the future.
Absolutely.
Meanwhile, just let's get back to Time Assassins one last time.
Sure.
How long ago did you finish the last one?
The last one came out in 2016.
Does it get cold?
You mean, you mean the sales?
No, the idea.
No. And I get this every convention as we're walking around showing everybody all of the books. I get to this and I say, this is alternate history time travel. And 99 times out of 100, their eyes light up and they go, ooh.
Well, there's a whole genre for that, isn't there now?
Right.
With steampunk rather.
Well, steampunk is different though, because this, and I tell them, I said, this is actual history. Think quantum leap with historical events. And they're like, oh,
right.
And when all three of these together, this is our best-selling trilogy. People buy all three at the same time at cons all the time. And I have toyed with making it, doing one more. Somewhere in the back of my head, there's an idea floating around going, you've got one more, but I don't want to. There was a reason, and I say this jokingly. The last one is called Assassin's End. And there's a reason I called it that, because it is the end of the series and the end of an assassin. I'm not going to tell you which one. So, and I've moved on. I've published a whole bunch since then. I try to do 2 a year. It's not working right now, so I'm down to about 1 a year. But I try to do something different. My next one that will be out this year is a crime thriller. I'm a sci-fi guy. So what do I know about crime thrillers? Well, I learned. And now I'm trying to stretch my writing ability to encompass things that I don't necessarily read as often as I do sci-fi. And so I'm just trying to stretch and grow. And that's what I encourage all of my writers to do.
Well, we wish you luck and thanks, Kyle.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.